I'm Paul Perrello, and welcome to the Philly Factor. Well, the life of a Philadelphia sports fan is filled with a lot of highs, but perhaps even more lows. I mean, just think about it. Except then the Eagles go to the Super Bowl, and then everything is turned upside down. But fact of the matter is, it makes for an interesting time in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia sports for that matter, especially if you set out to write a book about the life of a Philadelphia sports fan. Well, my guest on this edition of the Philly Factor is no stranger to LaSalle or even this studio here. Kevin Lagowski, his love of sports started at an early age thanks to his dad. Kevin is a graduate of LaSalle, 2006 you said?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Don't look a day older than when you were here in 2006. He was a communication major. He spent much of his time in this very studio, first as a member of the crew of LaSalle TV, and then of course as a panelist for Sports Talk Philadelphia. Today, when he isn't writing about Philadelphia sports, Kevin works for QVC and lives in Wilmington, Delaware, with his wife Rachel and his son Nolan. And Kevin is the author of a new book. The name of the book is I'm Getting a Sports Complex. I love the title. I'm Getting a Sports Complex, Trials and Tribulations of a 30-something Philadelphia sports fan. First of all, Kevin, welcome home.
Thank you, Paul.
Welcome back to LaSalle TV.
It's really good to be back, and the studio doesn't look any different from what I remember. I was really young and inexperienced the last time I was here, and
real young. Makes me feel like a dinosaur.
Okay.
But you know, but see, I can remember the Phillies winning the World Series in 1980.
right, I know.
Okay. All right. No, you were way too young then. But I love the book. I haven't been
Thank
able
you.
to put it down. And I want to get into the book here a little bit and what prompted you to decide that you were going to take out all of this angst as being a Philadelphia sports fan and decide to put it into a book.
Well, I've always enjoyed writing, and I've kind of fancied myself a good writer. At least that's what the grades from professors here
Your
at
grade
LaSalle
point
have told
average
me.
shows that, right?
Yeah, so at LaSalle and back to my high school, Salesianum, I have to give a special shout out to them in Wilmington. So I've always really just enjoyed expressing myself with the written word, and sports from a young age, as you mentioned, have been a passion of mine. And for decades, I was, without realizing it, kind of doing research for the book. Keeping track, like keeping that whole box of ticket stubs that we all have.
Yeah.
It's kind of gone the way of the dodo the last 5 to 10 years. Everything's e-ticketing and printouts, and you don't even feel like jamming it in the box. But I have kept track of every, aside from going back and be able to see a Flyers game from 1995 that I went to, something like that. I've kept track of every Flyers game since the opening of the Wells Fargo Center, or whatever it's been called, with the score and goals by period and things like that,
Right.
and things that I can then go back and look up online, like who scored that goal at a certain time, but I knew that I was at the game. And since the Phillies moved to Citizens Bank Park, I've done the same thing with them. Even before that at the Vet, I would keep score because I figured, oh, it'd be cool 20, 30 years down the road, see what Hall of Famers I've seen played. And I've seen that come to fruition. Now I can go back and see, and Orioles games too, and a little bit of Baltimore influence when I was younger, just seeing great players when I was young and having tangible evidence that I did that. And I guess just to remind myself when I get old and forget, or to like pass that along to my son, and hopefully he can become as big a sports fan as me. Yeah, and just my friends and I making fun of how bad the teams were locally for the most part. Like we loved them, and we could just bust on them all we wanted to, but you know they were our teams, and nobody else could say anything about them from outside the city. We love them, but we love to, you know, WIP on a Monday morning after an Eagles loss. It's when it's most fertile.
Yeah.
Just people complaining about things, and there's been no shortage of that in my life with my dad and friends. And I figured I'd put it into a book form, and then while I'm writing it, the Eagles win. And while it didn't totally change the spirit of the book, like I mentioned in the author's note at the beginning, it kind of added a nice happy ending that, hey, all this was worth it. Mm-hmm. So it was, and a friend of a friend went through this same process. He wrote a book. His name's Adrian Martin. He wrote a book called Father and Son, father being PH, about his memories of going to Phillies games with his dad. And it's a real kind of heartfelt book. And I figured he did that maybe a year and a half ago, and that I think was the final push to say, hey, I've got all these decades of recollections and kind of this pretty good, not photographic memory, but pretty good memory for things that I've seen in the sports world. And I'm going to write a book myself as well, so I have to give him credit for. But of course, mine's the like negative, sarcastic Philadelphia tone. It's like the complete.
Typical, yeah.
It's not heartwarming, and it's about all of Philadelphia, not just the Phillies. But
Yeah.
so it was. It took like 14 months to start, but like I said, I had been doing the research for decades. Yeah.
What was your earliest sports memory, your earliest sports recollection?
In terms of actual sports, and it's not even a Philadelphia sports event, it happened in Philadelphia, it would be the Duke-Kentucky 1992 NCAA tournament game where
Right.
Christian Laettner hit the buzzer beater that people call the shot. And I just remember I was 7 years old. I don't know why. That's the only NCAA tournament game I've ever been to still
Right.
to this day. And I think my dad's friend couldn't make it that night or whatever. And people were, as they were leaving the Spectrum, were saying that was the greatest college basketball game ever played. So I'd definitely been to Flyers and Phillies games before that and have the stubs to prove it, but I couldn't remember a specific home run or goal or anything like that. But that was the first time I remember a game and a play happening before my eyes. And then, within like a couple years, it was the Phillies in the World Series. It was a lot more Flyers games. It was my first Eagles game. So, but that was probably like the sports highlight. I crested at age 7 and it was just going down unless I end up getting to like the deciding game of the World Series or Stanley Cup final sometime, which is not going to happen.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I'm fine watching it on TV.
Yeah. When we talk about writing a book and all the research and everything that goes into it, I have to compliment you and remark at your ability to know somewhere in the past that saving all these ticket stubs and all this information and cramming it into a box is pretty remarkable, because oftentimes when you write a book, it's a game of catch-up. You have to go back and do all this homework. You have to, you at a young age were compiling all this information, not knowing that it was maybe at the time that it was going to lead to a book.
Right. I just thought when I was little, I'm so nuts about sports that I knew playing was out the window. I was okay at baseball and I played soccer like every little kid.
Right.
My parents had me the right mentality on me, like this is fun, but studies come first and everything, and you're going to make your living in an area not on the playing field or anything like that. But I did want to be, from an early age, involved in sports some way, so I wanted to maintain that connection. Broadcasting, I would always do watching a Phillies game and you put it on mute and you do your Harry Callis impression, as the game's going on, that sort of thing, or Merrill Reese for the Eagles, things like that. Broadcasting or announcing or just somehow being around a team, and I guess saving the stubs and all that was kind of a way for me to stay connected to it. And then, of course, the internet's a big help. When I go, I was like, I know I went to this game in 1995, and I remember the Flyers won to move on in the playoffs. But what exactly happened in that game, and I could pinpoint thanks to the wonderful internet, the good part of it that can just kind of jog us down memory lane. But the last 10 to 15 years, I've been able to just stay more in tune with it because of just the bombardment from all sides. It just kind of sinks in your brain when Carson Wentz has a bad game, and hopefully there's not many of those in the offing. Like, you're going to remember that more vividly because of all the media coverage than you would have 15 or 20 years ago. So that's kind of, I guess, helped it sink into my brain more. But as I've grown and aged, sports has kind of it's been put in its proper place. It's kind of all you care about when you're a little kid, and then it gets squeezed to the side, and then it's sort of whenever you have time for it. Not that you're any less of a fan, but it's kind of hard these days. I write about in the last couple chapters, immediately leading up to the Eagles Super Bowl win, how, man, it's been difficult to find the time, work schedule, family schedule. But you can always go back to that time when you were little and it was like your whole universe, and how much it meant to you. And I write in the book basically here's how I reacted when I was 10 to this. And it's kind of, it's not quite revisionist history, because I'm going back and trying my best to remember how I felt at that point of time. So somebody my age might be like, I remember feeling the same way. If you're a little bit older, you might have been further along and had a different reaction, or younger.
Yeah. What's from your perspective, what is so unique about being a Philadelphia sports fan? I mean, we're really passionate about our sports, regardless. I mean, first of all, in Philadelphia, we're fortunate enough that there is really a sport for every type of fan, whether it's baseball, hockey, soccer. I mean, so, but what is it that makes us either be the envy of other cities, or sometimes the laughing stock of other cities, because we're so passionate about our teams, be it win or losing?
Yeah, for some reason, the East Coast and the whole Northeast, like, they're the top sports fans. As much as I don't like New York and Boston, nice places to visit at least, but the people, the fans there, they're more rabid about sports than, and professional sports especially, than people in Houston, Miami, Atlanta, that kind of thing. Maybe it's because of the weather patterns here, and we have to go through all the seasons, so the sports kind of correspond to it. And I think Philadelphia especially has that long talked about inferiority complex. I don't think 95 is even meant to go through here. They kind of just forgot to make it an easy on and off in Philadelphia. And we're just sandwiched between New York and Boston and DC, and we're just a throughway, and people, it's ultimate blue collar town, that sort of thing. So the connection to the teams here, and even in New York, you've got, since it's so huge, and there's like 20 professional teams there. It's like we have our 4 teams. We've got one in each sport, which is And our sports complex, literally like with the double meaning of my book, we have the inferiority complex, which is my sports complex that I talk about, and the physical sports complex, where I spend a lot of time watching games and working at games. It's unlike anywhere else in the country, really. It's kind of downtown ballparks are nice, like in Baltimore, Pittsburgh, places like that, but it's kind of like our set aside holy ground where the good and oftentimes the bad occurs. But it's just unique, and we have an attachment to our teams unlike any other. And I say that as being from Delaware, but as I mentioned in the book, if you consider like South Jersey and the Philadelphia suburbs like Philadelphia, well, northern Delaware has to be included in that because I'm like at the sports complex in 35 minutes from where I am, which is a lot easier to get to than some of the outlying areas. So we consider ourselves part of Philadelphia too. There was a poll a couple years ago, and the #1 professional team in a poll for the state of Delaware was the Eagles.
Wow.
Now, Pennsylvania was the Steelers because there's so many of those fans out west, so we're the only team, the only state that can say that we have a Philadelphia team as our favorite team. So it is northern Delaware heavy, but yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody last week and was surprised to find outside of the 5-county southeastern Pennsylvania area that it's like Steelers country.
Yeah, once you hit Lancaster, it's totally
even upstate. You know, it's like it's like okay, Pittsburgh, yeah, Steelers, but Harrisburg, Lancaster. I mean, it's all Steelers country.
It is, and I guess it's just if the Eagles had a run in the '70s with all the Super Bowls, it
True.
would be them.
Yeah,
you kind of make fans for life, and maybe if the Eagles can win 2 or 3 more Super Bowls in the next decade, and the Steelers, touch laminate or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
If they can become like which is hard to do now, more teams and more parity in professional sports, see how hard it is to repeat, let alone win 3 or 4 in a decade.
Yeah.
If the Eagles do that and the Steelers kind of fall by the wayside, which looks like they might be this year, then maybe they can reclaim some of that area, or maybe it wasn't theirs to begin with. It was before my time. So,
yeah.
But it's just sort of like the voting when you see the in politics, you got the 2 pockets, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and the rest of the state is just totally different color.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a whole different world, as a matter of fact.
It is, yeah.
I know I want to sandwich our show here with a reading from the book
great.
from the beginning, and then towards the end, I'll have you wrap it up with a reading.
Okay.
But this is from the begining of your book.
Yeah, this is the first chapter, and this kind of gives you an idea of the tone of the book and the humor that I'm hopefully achieving. And this little part's about going to Flyers games with my dad when I was a little kid. From the time we parked to the time we walked through the Spectrum's turnstiles, we'd always stop to grab some pretzels to take inside. Boy, did I cut my gums on so many of those soft pretzels, 3 for $1. I'm not sure if outside food, if you can call those things food, were expressly prohibited by the airtight security, but it was probably a just keep it out of sight policy. So my dad would always hand the paper bag of pretzels to me for smuggling in. Nobody would ever suspect the round, bespectacled kid in the starter jacket. And truly there was nothing as sweet as the fine particles of the brown paper bag adhering to the salt and sinking into the pretzels, high in fiber, no doubt. One of the people I associate most vividly with the Spectrum, and no discussion of this edifice would be complete without me mentioning him, wasn't a player or a coach or an announcer. It was a vendor. I have no idea what the guy's name is, but I've seen him at various sports events in Philadelphia and even some Orioles games in Baltimore over a span of 20-plus years. He was a droopy-faced, short guy that would dutifully roam the stands, hawking the normal sporting event fare. One day in particular, as he slowly ascended the stairs near us with a tray of chocolate-dipped vanilla cones, his voice rang out, "Ice cream, ice cream." What also rang out was about half a lung, as he absolutely was hacking all over them. Some poor guy somewhere probably wonders where the mixed nuts on his cone came from that day. Hence, the Ice Cream Man was born. He lives forever in the hearts and minds of Philadelphia fans, is a charter member of the Stadium Vendor Hall of Fame, and per my friend Frank's suggestion, really makes me want to write a coffee table book of stadium vendors. I think it would be a must-read for all fans.
We've all seen this guy. We know this guy.
Yeah.
We met him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that is.
They're
fun.
like your family. The guy with the eye patch and the parrot at Phillies games and all that.
Yeah.
I wish I had some more background knowledge on these guys. Write up an article on them.
Yeah, really. And chances are, given he may never be with us today, but these guys live on in their legacies. And another thing that I remember, because I live down there. I mean, I'm at the sports
Right
complex.
there, yep.
But the parking back in the day when it was like $5 to park for a Flyers game. Now you need to give your eye teeth in order to park for
Pretty
a
much,
game.
yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. You also have in your book something that I like is that you have a list of the most unlikable or the disliked sports.
It's Philadelphia athletes.
Yeah, Philadelphia athletes.
Yeah.
Who's on the top of the list?
The top of the list for me is Scott Rowland. Just based on, and it's a shame because he came to the Phillies at a time where I was like 11 or 12, really impressionable, and they were pitching him as the next Mike Schmidt. They had been bad for a couple years after '93, and I really liked him at first. And then as the years wore on, and it was the team's fault, management, for not surrounding him with a lot of talent. But he just became very disenchanted with the fans, and sort of, again, he wasn't that typical Philadelphia athlete, which, fair or not, he just was a Midwestern guy, like real quiet, and we kind of think like that standoffish personality we don't really take to very much. And he had some injury problems. He complained publicly and finally forced his way out of town in a trade. And so I came up with the idea for the list when I was here at LaSalle on Sports Talk Philadelphia. The Orioles were having, for their 50th anniversary, celebrated like 50 most fan-favorite Orioles of all time for their franchise 50th anniversary. And I thought, let me make a list of my 50 most disliked Philadelphia athletes, going back to probably just 10 to 12 years at that point from what I remember.
Yeah. And
I've repurposed the book, and Roland was #1 at that time as well, 13 years ago. And I've repurposed the list now. I have a decade more of ammunition to deal with. And so it's, chock full of Flyers, Phillies, Sixers, and Eagles that and these are Philadelphia athletes that played here. They're not rivals that we don't like, Sidney Crosby and Troy Aikman and whoever else. They're players that played here, and either because they were maybe good players but fell well short of the expectations heaped upon them, or they were just flat out terrible and had no business being on a major league field or a court or on the ice surface. Or maybe they were okay and there wasn't too, but they were just jerks. Jonathan Papelbon being a prime example of that. Like, that was clearly a mistake when they signed him to begin with. Everybody saw that was coming, and he just, look at his numbers, and he's the Phillies' all-time saves leader, and he was good while he was here, but we want to talk about clubhouse cancer, and I don't think that's mincing words, because he went to the Nationals right after that and ruined them. So it was that's what really kind of sticks in your craw as a fan. Like, this guy either was just disrespectful to us or his teammates, or just was lousy, which is a lot of guys.
Talking about sports heroes, I mean, we all like to meet them. We want to meet them. Have you had any opportunities to meet some of your sports heroes?
I have, yes. So my #1 player that's my sports hero is Bernie Perrant, which is kind of strange because he played before I was even born.
I remember both.
Yeah, so he was great, and he's still around at Flyers games all the time. A friend of mine works for a cigar company, and they had a Bernie Perrant cigar. And so I met Bernie once when I was a little kid, and I detail that in the book as well. It was I was like 10 years old, and I got to meet him. I was so excited. But years later, and I think I saw him once or twice again. It becomes casual. Hey, Bernie, even though he's an all-time legend, and his autograph is like absolutely worthless because he signed so many over the years. He's just everybody's favorite. And so I got to go in the whatever it's called now, the cigar club, for just a couple minutes, and I had to get out of there at that point because of the haze hanging. But met him again a couple years ago. My wife got to meet him for the first time, and she's a newbie Flyers fan the last decade or so. She didn't grow up on it like me, but even she was thrilled to meet him. And she never saw him play either. I saw him playing an alumni game and everything like that, but he's just like the reverence that people hold. Like, I think my dad just kind of forced that into me when I was little and playing street hockey goalie. Like, this is the guy. Basically, I wouldn't have won these championships without him. The Flyers, you can give full credit, obviously, to Ed Snyder for birthing the franchise, but without Bernie Perrant, those teams don't win championships, and they're not as prominent as they are today. Like, maybe they don't last because a couple teams from that expansion have moved, and teams move or not necessarily fold up anymore, but maybe we don't have the Flyers as we know it, and they don't have that maybe small but loyal, ferocious fan base without Bernie and players like him. But my #1 sports hero, not a player, but hero, was Harry Callis, definitely. And I detail my meeting with him in the book. And then when he passed away, that was honestly, aside from the immediate family members, it was one of the saddest days of my life, because players come and go, but he was here for my whole life. And years before that and everything. It was just so wonderful that he got to be around for that World Series in 2008. And then we had the heartbreak just a few months later and after that. And it was sort of like, we can never have anything nice. It was sort of a reminder that, it was like, appreciate what you have while it's here.
And Harry, and as well as so many of the, some of the sportscasters that I remember growing up, they really were part of the soundtrack of our life. And Harry is really at the top of the list.
And NFL films too, Notre Dame football and things like that. Harry was just the voice, and it was great. And Merrill Reese is great too. I've never actually met him. I'd like to meet him and do my impression for him. That's one of my. Ever since I got
maybe you don't want to do the impression.
I did my impression for Joe Conklin before, who's my favorite in terms of impressionists, and he liked it. So.
What is it you hope, Kevin, that people take away from your book?
I guess just that, the sports matter. They're an important part of community and uniting people. We saw it no greater way than when the Eagles won a few months ago. They should be put in their rightful place. They shouldn't be dominating your life to the point where you're ignoring your responsibilities at home or your work or anything like that. But they can help you kind of get along in life when times are tough. They're not a total substitute for the nurturing love of your family, or
Sure.
or a job that pays you well to help support that family. But just that for me personally, and I act as like a surrogate or stand-in for people of my generation. I say ages maybe 20 to 40, or like 28 to 38 if you want to do it in a 5-year window around my age. That we all have these shared experiences, and sports can kind of bring us together. And maybe you reacted a lot of the same ways I did to this book, so you're not alone in the way you cried when the Eagles lost this game when you were 10 years old, or heartbreaking playoff losses or anything like that, player injuries, things like that. It's important to us as in this tri-state Delaware Valley area, and I've never seen a book exactly like this. There's a lot of great books by Ray Didinger and other really, really good writers, Hall of Fame writers around here, but never one written in the tone of a fan, watching it as a fan, and just telling you how he felt in the moment and seeing whether, and you can agree or disagree, but it's all out there for you. Here's how it is.
I know. I also want to bring up your website too.
Oh,
Why
yeah.
don't you mention your website for us, and we can find more of these articles that you write on
Yes.
your website.
Yeah, so it's phillysportscomplex.com. Goes in hand with the title. I'm getting a sports complex. So it started in May, and I began it as a way to I was basically done writing the book at that point, and I wanted to keep writing about I basically stopped a little bit after the Eagles won the Super Bowl. But there was still so much more to cover that wasn't going to make it in the book, because you have to have a finite stopping point for the book. But
Right.
It was a way for me. And I wrote for Bleacher Report like 10 years ago when that was a new thing. So not that I had a big background in sports writing necessarily, but it was fun, and I've enlisted some friends to help me out with it. And so it was about promoting the book, which was going to come out a few months later, and it was about an ongoing series of chronicling the Philly season or whatever was happening at that time. I love making lists, like in the book, the 50 most disliked athletes. So there's a list of 10 best Phillies outfielders of this century, and the 10 best Flyers defensemen of this century, or right before the Eagles started their season, the 10, I call it the 10 crappiest Eagles season opening games of the last 20 years. I pin things down a lot to this century or the last 20 years, because that's the hopeful audience that I'm writing for.
Yeah.
And so if you're not sure about the book, I would say go to phillysportscomplex.com, and if you like the tone that is set in and the way that I write, then there's more of the same in the book, just from earlier.
Let's go to your the other thing that you're going to read for us
yeah, sure.
from the back of the book.
Yes. So before we get the absolute last part is the disliked athletes, but the book proper, the final chapter, wraps up this way. Shortly after the Eagles hoisted the Lombardi Trophy, Villanova's men's basketball team captured their second NCAA title in 3 seasons. It was a marvelous accomplishment on their part, but not a reason to celebrate for me personally. Also, in the immediate aftermath of the Eagles winning, the Flyers and 76ers seemed to kick things into high gear with solid stretch drives of their own. The Flyers made the playoffs despite looking very iffy midway through the season, while the Sixers rode the wave of a franchise record winning streak to their first playoff appearance in 6 years and made the second round of the postseason. Even the Phillies looked good out of the gate in 2018. Early brain cramps by rookie manager Gabe Kaplan provided valuable lessons, and the team responded with solid play rather than going off the rails in April, a sight far too common since the end of the team's World Series era. All in all, it seems to be a great time to be a fan in this town. These teams are a lifetime commitment for me, and hopefully for you as well. Day in and day out, they are there for our investment, which is why we care so much. Their constant presence is a stabilizer in our lives and a rallying point for friends and families. And it feels so good right now. We all chased the dream and caught it. Our goal realized, our faith rewarded, our greatest desire satisfied. What a marvelous feeling. Worth it. Now let's keep it going.
Excellent way to end the book, and it's special to be a Philadelphia sports fan. It's an obsession with many people.
It is, yep.
Sometimes an extreme obsession.
We get the reputation for it. Yes.
But I think you said before it's important to keep it all in perspective.
It is, yes. So the book really starts off, I'm 8, 9 years old, watching the Phillies lose the World Series and not even staying up because it's late. I think the Joe Carter home run I mentioned in the book was on a Saturday night, and I don't know why I wasn't up watching. It's not like I had school the next day, but it's a different world back then, and then it just kind of chronicles me as I grow and mature, and the place in my life, and now I'm to the point where getting to games is difficult because of home obligations and my work schedule.
Sure.
Still means I do my best to watch them at home, and I'm trying to make my son appreciate it as well. He's only 2, so not much is sinking in at this point yet.
Right.
But that is hopefully something that we can bond over and share together, and just my wife too, as a family. It's not going to be the most important thing, but it'll be there as just another way for us to connect. So it's important.
How has this whole experience writing this book influenced you?
I think I look just at opportunities now, anytime something happens, I have an outlet now. Writing this last year, I was kind of working my way up to present day, and I was able to sort of write immediate reactions to it, kind of knee-jerk things. And now with the website, which wouldn't have happened without the book because it really whet my appetite for writing after a long dormant period. Now I can kind of look at everything that happens and take this writer's mentality, which I'm not a professional writer, book is self-published and everything, but it really kind of sparked my interest. I think it rekindled the sports relationship. I mean, the Eagles were a big help, obviously, but man, things were terrible here for a couple years there. I don't think we had a team get past the first round of the playoffs for 5 or 6 years, and with 4 professional sports, and it was bad. So the book was kind of started out of frustration and ended with ecstasy in a way.
If you're a sports fan, if you know a sports fan, and who isn't a sports fan, you want to make sure. And can they get the book through the website?
Yeah, well, the book, the website sends you on a link through Amazon.
Okay.
The parent or company that I self-published through is in Amazon, ARM.
Okay.
So it's got to go through them.
All right. So again, that's how you can get a copy of the book. I'm Getting a Sports Complex: Trials and Tribulations of a 30-something Philadelphia sports fan. I want to thank you, Kevin, for being with us.
Thank you so much, Paul.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It was really fun.
Until the next time, thanks so much for listening to the Philly Factor or watching the Philly Factor. My name is Paul Perrello, and come on back and see us next time. Good job.
Thank you.